We are about to give a series of introductory shiurim to explain up what a Chachmas Emes is and give a broad outline as to what it's contained within it. This is going to be a series of 4 shiurim, Be'ezer Hashem, and in the first shiur we're going to deal with what exactly is Chachmas Emes. Chachmas Emes goes by several names. It's called Kabbalah, it's called Chachmas Nister, it's called the Pnimis HaTorah. Basically what Chachmas Emes is that it explains it explains the whys of Torah. In other words, there's a big difference between the Niglas HaTorah, which is composed of Mikra, which are the Chavdal Sfarim of Tanakh, Mishnayos, and Gemara, and Chachmas Emes or Chachmas Nister. Because you see, in the Mashal, if you were to learn Masechtas Shabbos, so therefore you would get the what, when, how of keeping Shabbos. But you wouldn't know the whys. You wouldn't understand why there's an Isser of Boirer on Shabbos. You wouldn't understand why there's an Isser of Haitzah on Shabbos. But Aidei Chachmas Emes, this provides us with the whys. And it provides us with a framework for understanding Torah better. Not only that, but Chachmas Emes also gives us an answer to all of the big questions that people ask. L'moshel Tachas Abriya. In other words, why are we here? What is the avodah of the Yaldim? Where do we fit into the picture? Where do Goyim fit into the picture? Where do all the Briyas fit into the picture? In other words, also the bechinas of what exactly is Bechira, the martial free will, as we know that we all have. What exactly does that mean? And what does it mean in the bechina of Ra? Where does evil come from? Which is a very big kasha that people have. The yin of Tzodik V'Roloi and Rosh V'Toivloi. In other words, Hashgacha Protius. Why does Hashem do the things that He does, and how come it acts this way? Now, we might not know all the answers to these things, but at least we'll have better answers to understand why these things are occurring. The Chachmas Emes is a chelik of Torah. It's a chelik of Torah that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, just like the Niglas Torah was given to him, and it was given over Zohar, a tradition from every door. In fact, the word Kabbalah literally means to receive, because that's what happens over here, because this was given over Talmud to Rebbe. And it was given over Baal Peh, just like every other chelik of Torah Baal Peh, because the Chachmas Emes is a chelik of the Torah Baal Peh, although there is a Shittas HaGra that holds that Chachmas Emes is distinct from Torah Baal Peh. But of course, it is an oral tradition, and it was given over from Talmud to Rebbe, till the days of Rabbi Shimon. In the days of Rabbi Shimon, the truth is there were Sfarim that came before Rabbi Shimon, that most notably suffered the Tniyusa, which could have been written by Rabbi Shimon, and some attributed to Yankov Avinu. And there were also Sfarim like Sefer Yetira, which is attributed to Avraham Avinu, at least in its oral form, although it probably was put down in writing by Rabbi Kiva and his Saverim. But in the days of Rabbi Shimon and his Talmidim, it was put down, right? All of the different sugyas dealing with Chachmas Emes. These are all the different ways by which we connect with Hashem, and all the different matzovim, all the different, like Moshe, when there's a bechina of Hesed Panim, when Hashem does reveal Himself, and when there's a bechina of Gili Panim, when we have more or, and the Moshe, the union of the Moedim, and Shabbos, and Yom Tov, and all of these things. Now, the Zohar HaKadosh, which is basically all the sugyas, which are mafaret, right, was hidden away after the door of Reb Shimon, because we were moving into a very dark age, which was because the 6,000 years of creation corresponds to the 6 lower spheres, which we will get to Hashem in the next year, right, to explain this. But Alpha Hamishi corresponds to Hoyd, which is the whole back shefa. So this shefa was held back for over 1,000 years until in the 1300s the Zohar HaKadosh was Megalit. Now, this doesn't mean that the Messiah stopped, because this was given over Talmud to Rebbe, Rebbe to Talmud. But it was only the Yeshidim in every door who knew this. Like we know that Ramban, Al Torah, it was a very big makubal, and he gives over much Kabbalah in his Pirush. And I said he was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Azriel, who was a Talmud of Yitzchak Inor, who was a Talmud of the Ravid. These were given over Peh El Peh. Now, this situation continued until around the 1500s, the days of the Ramak from Moshe Cordovero, who wrote his Sefer Pardes, and then the Arizal. Now, the Arizal, right, is the one that we have, is the one that was to be Megala, the Chachmas Emes that we have. And what he did was, we all know that he didn't live a long life. He was nifter at the age of 38. And at the age of 36, he was told that he had to leave Mitzrayim, where he was living, and go up there to Israel, to Sfas, and there he would have a Talmud by the name of Rabbi Vital. And Rabbi Vital was going to write down this Torah because the Arizal had such a mayach that it was very difficult for him to be mitzamtzim himself in order to write down this Torah. And the Mela, his Talmud had to go and do this. So therefore the Rabbi Vital, the Talmud of the Arizal wrote down Chachmas Emes. And what he did was and after the Arizal's Patira, because remember Rabbi Vital was only 29 and 30 years old when he worked with him, and Rabbi Vital was nifter when he was 77. So in the ensuing almost 50 years, he kept on writing and writing, and therefore we have the corpus which we call the Kisvei Arizal. Now the writings of the Arizal are really the writings of Rabbi Vital, but it's the Torah of the Arizal. The way it works is like this. Rabbi Volozhin, in his Hakdama to the Gross Pirish on Sefer Knisa, explained that there's a small sefer called Sefer Knisa, and that's equivalent to like the Mishnayos. That's all of Chachmas Emes in a very, very, very compact form. The Zohar KADOSH is like the Gemara, if you will, but that's an expansion of Sefer Knisa. And also along with the Yitris, there's a Torah given over by Rav Shimon. It's an expansion of that. And then, but the Shulchan Aruch, all the sugyas, right, in place, that was given over by the Arizal to Rabbi Vital. And there are many svarim in the corpus of the Kisvei Arizal, but they were written by Rabbi Vital. Now this went now at that point, once the Arizal was nifter, so now Rabbi Vital was not the only Talmud of the Arizal. There were other Talmidim, and they spread his Torah far and wide. And within 2 generations already, it had taken over the entire world, and everybody was learning Kisvei Arizal. And this situation continued until about 250 years ago or so, where there were 4 very big Talmidei Chachamim who lived around the same time, and they broke up the Kisvei Arizal into 4 different mahalchim, which in general correspond to Pshat, Remes, Drush, and Soid. So even though we're dealing in Soid here, but there's a Pshat of the Soid. That would be the Rishash, Rav Shalom Sharabi, who was a Makubal, who lived first he was in Taman, then he went to Eretz Yisrael, he was nifter at age 57, and what he gives over is the Pshat of Chachmas Emes, because he put together all the Sukkot in the Kisvei into one coherent form. Then you have the Remes, which of course is the Gra, because he has many writings on the Kisvei, in fact, and on Kabbalah. In fact, he held that he was bigger in Chachmas Emes than he was in the Niglas Torah, and we know that he was pretty big in Niglas Torah too. So you can imagine. And we have svarim from him also. But as anybody familiar with the gross writings knows, it's very much Beremes, and he plugs it into Gemara and he plugs it into Psukim. Then you have the Drush of Chachmas Emes, which is the Ramchal. Because the Ramchal, what he did was he took the Kisvei and he was lavish it in, if you will, in terms of Haga, in terms of the way a Kadosh Baruch Hu was noig with the Brius. And then you have, of course, the Baal Shem Tov, which is the Bechina of, and by him I mean Hasidus in general, which would be the Soid, in a manner of speaking, because he brought it down to show the Avodah aspect of it and how it's negated to everyone. And by him I mean all the different streams that came of Hasidus. They're all coming to explain of Chachmas Emes how it's negated to each and every person. There were Machabrim after this. The most notably, in the past 100 years, there was someone called the Leshem Shloy V'Achlama, who is the grandfather of the present Rebbe Yosef, and he was, and I quote him constantly. When I quote him, I say the Leshem for short, and he's sort of like the Rikiv Eger, if you will, of Chachmas Emes, because he's methodical very greatly in the Sukkis and explains them in tremendous depth. So this is in terms of the limit of Chachmas Emes. This is the Messiah that we have to this day. In terms of the milas of Chachmas Emes. Chachmas Emes is the most halakha aspect of Torah that we have, and not only because again it explains what's behind the curtain, if you will, because the Niglas Torah only explains the outside, what's Negeya L'Maisa, part of the Torah. Mashiach Chachmas Emes also explains what's Negeya L'Maisa, because we will see that it is L'Maisa, but it explains the underlying reasons why these things are done. In other words, L'Moshel. Person has to shake lulav and esrog on sukkahs, right? We all know that. Now, but why do we shake lulav and esrog? Now, Niglas Torah only teaches us how do you do it, and when do you do it, and requirements for lulav and esrog. But why do you do it? For that, we have to go into Chachmas Emes. It's brought down in the Svarim HaKadoshim that the Soif Yamav, meaning Kodim Bias and Mashiach, this Chachma will be Megula more and more and more. Now, there's several reasons for that. But before we go into the reasons, we have to ask the question, if this is the most favorite aspect of Torah, why should it be that in the later generations, this Torah should be Megala, Mashiach, in earlier generations it was not? As you see from the days of the Arizal and onward, because before the Arizal was Mamash Losam. And now it's becoming more Begili. You have all of these Svarim written by all of these great Chachamim on the Kisvei and on Kabbalah. And the reason why that is and one of the major, actually, do we say that we're better than the previous generations? Well, one of the Pasuk shot in this is because of the psichas of the door, where we're holding. Because we know that the Mashiach, we know that before Mashiach will come, chutzpah yisa'ada, that chutzpah will raise its ugly head. And chutzpah is the board that people ask questions, why should I do it? In other words, before the reformers came along, let's say, you would say there was no question of why you should live in Esrog. You're a Jew. You should live in Esrog. The Emunah Pshuta was there, and we had a distinct Messiah. But nowadays, because of the influence of the reformers, and of course because of the Holocaust, which was the greatest tragedy that occurred to us since the Churban Abayis, our Messiah has been truncated, and therefore people ask questions why. Before these times, people didn't used to ask why. There were only Yechidim who would ask why, because they weren't necessary to know the answers. Why? Because Hashem said so. That's enough. Why? But nowadays you have to know, you want to know the whys. Therefore, nowadays more and more people want to know the whys. And therefore that's what this Chachma gives us. And therefore for Karen, it's from the psichas of the door. It's because we're lower, therefore we have this Chachma, as opposed to previous generations where that was not necessary. That's one pshat. Another pshat is because you see, Torah reflects on the Olamite, the matzah of the Tikkun. As far as what Tikkun and Kippur is, we're going to go into in another shir of Mitzvah. But the point is like this. But even though even though we know Mitzvah Chitzonius, the world is getting worse and worse and worse, and the Yerida that we've had just the past few years is gefährlich. It's anybody just look around and you can see it. Things that were considered abnormal just a few years ago are considered normal now, and you wonder how far down it's going to go. That's a reflection of the Chitzonius of Torah is a reflection of the Chitzonius of the Lumas. And that's why there's such a miyut in terms of the understanding of the Chitzonius of Torah. I don't mean in terms of people learning Torah, because Baruch Hashem in this Torah, there are a lot of people who learn Torah. But true Talmidei Chachamim, who have a breadth and of knowledge of Torah, you do not have in this generation. You only have people who are more ma'ayin and more ma'ayin, and they'll know less and less. Ramashal, like I always like to give as an example, like Archibald Gemorahs, right? 20 years ago, Archibald Gemorahs did not exist. And the reason why is because 20 years ago they were not necessary, but now in this story they are necessary. And if Mashiach will not come in the next 20 years, Chas v'sholom, then there will have to be a pirush on Archibald Gemorahs, because Archibald Gemorahs will be too difficult for people to understand. And that's just the way it is, because the Chitzonius of the Torah represents the Chitzonius of the elements, which is getting worse and worse and worse. But the Pnimis of Torah is prepared. The Pnimis of Torah represents the Pnimis of and even though we can't see it, but it might say everything that has to be fixed up in order to come to the Tikkun HaShalom is being fixed up. But that's reflective of Pnimis. So therefore, in terms of Pnimis of Torah is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not that. This is a word from the lesson. So therefore, nowadays there's no hakada not to learn it. B'maisa, all right. Of course, it has to be done by kedusha b'tahara, right? The limit chachmas emes. And I just have to say that if one is going to learn chachmas emes, one should be makbid on Tzilas Ezra l'kol pochis, because he has to have a certain amount of kedusha tahara. The truth that's an equals in the limit, and one should be very careful with this. But Tzayif Kol Tzayif, if one does learn this Torah and understands that this is a chelik of Torah, not divorced from the rest of Torah, then that a person can rise to tremendous milos without this. And a tremendous ideas kaviyochel in the Rebbeinu Shalom, and tremendous asagas in terms of avodah. Now, as far as the goal, the mitzvah of Chachmas Emes, so there are several goals in terms of Chachmas Emes. Pasuk Shad is that it's a chelik of Torah, and it's no different than any other chelik of Torah. So what's the goal of learning Baba Mitzvah? Is to know Baba Mitzvah, and to learn Hashem's Torah. But the Chachmas Emes is special in terms of the fact that we know that the Pasuk says, Ein oid milvadoi. There is nothing besides a Kadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol. So Mela, that begs the question, how does one understand this? How does one come to a hakara of this? The fact that we see all of these things that don't make sense. We see all of the road that goes on in the world. And we see all the questions that we have. Right? So Mamela, by understanding Chachmas Emes, right, one comes to such an understanding. One understands how everything is part of a plan and how everything fits in perfectly. We might not understand completely how everything fits in perfectly, and that will only be Achar B'Yis Mashiach and El Fashvi. But Tzayif Kol Tzayif at this point, at least a glimmer we can have. It's brought down in the Kisiyari that the luchos, that there's a big difference between the luchos Rishonos and the luchos Shniyos. The luchos Rishonos were broken, as we know, and the etzem luchos were written by the writing was a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and the actual carving out of the luchos was also a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kaviyachol, the second luchos, on the other hand, though, the carving of the luchos was Aydei Moshe Rabbeinu, although the writing was still Hashem's. So that's a major difference between the Niglas of Torah and the Nister of Torah. Because you see, in the Niglas of Torah, everything is dealing with a dash mystic and noisa. In other words, whatever you learn in Torah, if you're learning, let's say, Baba Kama, so somebody has an ox, somebody has a cow, and so we can learn about damages. If you're learning Kachim, so therefore we can talk about how the Avodah is done. It has some Dash Mystic and Nisa. Mashiach, when we're dealing in Chachmas Emes, we don't have like Dash Mystic and Nisa, because what we're dealing with is the Luchas Rishonis, this is the Torah that we lost, that we would have had Eluya the Chait of the Egel, which was akin to the Chait of the Eitzadas, actually. But we do have the Shviras HaLuchis and the broken Luchis, and all of our Chachmas comes because of this. So therefore, whatever little bit we have of Chachmas Emes, the truth is we have a lot there at heart, but it's only a mashal of what there is. The Yisrael Hashem Yisbarach, by Bisa Mashiach, and the Torah Mashiach will be this Torah. And so therefore to understand the plan, to understand where we fit in and what the avoid of the Odin is. Not only that, but also the application of Chachmas Emes, because once one understands the system, so therefore this teaches us the kavanas, the intentions that one should have right behind the tefillah. In other words, what does Shachars do for us? We daven Shachars yesterday. Why do we have to daven Shachars again today? And all of the mitzvahs, like and the Moedim, like what eating matzah and Pesach. Right? What exactly does this do for us? And furthermore, like we said, even more so than that, all of the big questions are maybe not answered totally, but at the very least they're spoken about, and at the very least we know where to place them. We have a framework, right, by which where to put them. Therefore, it's very kedai to spend at least a little bit of one's time in terms of this limud, right, to do this. Okay, let me see what else I want to say. One more thing I have to say also, that there's a big difference again between Nidus Torah and Nisr Torah. And the difference is we're going to see that there's a difference between Kalal and Prat, the totality and the Prat, the specific. You see, we're going to see in Hashem in the next year. We're going to go into the Olamais, and we're going to talk about something called Adam Kadman and Abiyah, and we're going to explain also about the spheres, and we're going to explain that there's something called Chachma and there's something called Bina. Now, the difference between Chachma and Bina is the difference between Klal and the difference between Prat. Meaning Chachma is like seeing, like you see the whole room in one glance, as opposed to Bina, which is between a Prat, that's the meaning of like Shmi, of hearing, where you hear things one thing after another. All of Nigdush Torah is a between of Prat. All of Gemara is Keneged Bina. That's the famous word, by the way, in the Gemara always says Shama, come in here. Because what Gemara tries to do is it tries to make Chilukim. It tries to make differences, because that's basically what Gemara is doing. It brings a brisa that seemingly argues on a mission, so we have to come up with some difference, some chiluk between them, and we have to say that the mission is going on this, and the brisa is going on this. Or if you look at a Tosis will bring some other Gemara, somewhere else in Shas, and we'll play it against the Gemara that we're learning. And therefore we'll see that there's a difference between this Gemara and that Gemara. But Chachmas Emes does not do that. In Chachmas Emes there are various sugis. There are a lot of sugis in Chachmas Emes, but ultimately they're all oil b'kana echad. They're all coming together to say the same thing. And what are they coming to say? To show the achdus and the connection between us and Akash Baruch Hu. Because when you boil down this limud, it comes down to Kavyochel us and Akash Baruch Hu, and the relationship thereof between us and Akash Baruch Hu, right? Therefore, and ultimately, there's a chinus achdus here, because ultimately everything has a meaning, and therefore that's what the Chachmas Emes will explain. Okay, I think we'll stop here with this year, and in the next year we'll go into more in detail.